Caesar's reform of the calendar, Spengler says, may almost be regarded as a deed of emancipation from the classical world feeling for its anti-duration nature, its emphasis on the present, and its need to forget past and future. He says that Caesar wanted to actually shift the center of the empire from Rome to Alexandria and to create a dynasty, a dynastic succession. And dynasty was alien to the classical sensibility. It introduces the badge of duration and the will toward duration into the future. Caesar wanted to institute that. And of course the solar calendar of the Egyptians comes out of Alexandria, and all of that comes out of this period in which the classical ideals are beginning already to disintegrate. And he says that even the classical preference for burning the dead, which first comes in with the Dorians about 1200 BC, just after the Mycenaean world, the Mycenaeans had disposed of the dead still in a monumental fashion by building monumental, the toloi, the beehive-shaped tombs that they would put the dead in, and it was still very monumental, and there was still a very strong regard for a sort of ancestor worship there. The Dorians did away with those types of graves and introduced burning of the dead, and so we have, replacing the beehive tomb, we simply have the funerary urn with the ashes in it as basically a manifestation of this will to anti-duration. The classical man is dissolving the body, that vehicle which precisely gave a present, in which a present was anchored and localized. Since the present is no longer there, the body is done away with. And so there's also a weakening of ties to the underworld and to the worship of the ancestors amongst the Greeks. Really, for the first time in history, the Greeks are the first to begin to dispense with the ancestor cults. The Minoans before them had been the first to stop the practice of burying the dead under the floors of their houses and to eject them outside the city wall and build them and put them into a separate cemetery. So the Greeks are the first to introduce this bias against ancestor worship. And Spengler says this is part of their manifestation of their ahistorical sensibility, their basic tendency to forget the past, to live moment to moment, and not to plan for the future. And he says this is also evident in the vision of Mary and the Christ child, which first appears in the historical civilization, very historically conscious civilization of the Egyptians, as Isis with the Horus child on her lap. And it reappears in our Western civilization, which is the ultra-historical civilization par excellence, during the Gothic period as the Mary with the Christ child on her lap. The Christ is the child is the symbol of the future. It's the symbol of care, Zorga, Heidegger's Zorga, the care that orients the consciousness toward planning for the future and thrusting past the present frame and planning for the future. And that goes down to the paintings of Raphael and his Sistine Madonna, which is the sort of apotheosis of this style. But it's precisely in the Greek image of the Kori, the Demeter, without the child. The whole image of Demeter there is that the child is missing. The child has gone down into the underworld and she is lamenting its absence. That becomes illustrative of the fact that there is no concern for the future there in this civilization. It's not historically oriented. Same thing as in the case of the Indian civilization. And he says that it's in both the Indian civilization as well and the classical civilization that we have the worship of the phallus. The phallus is pure present. It has no future, no past. It is a pure symbol of the present. And indeed we find it as one of the primary iconographic cult aspects of the cult of Dionysus, and we find it in India as the lingam, the cult of Shiva. These are the two most ahistoric civilizations, India and the classical world, out of all the other civilizations. And so we have that aspect. Then Spengler goes on to an interesting discussion of what he calls incident. Incident versus destiny, and what is incident. And he basically says that the way that history fulfills itself, especially in his new model, his morphological model, in which, as we saw yesterday, there are, just like a living organism, there are certain predetermined phases that must happen and that must take place with inward certainty. So too, in these civilizations, there are certain epochs that have to take place no matter what happens. But Spengler says that the way in which they take place doesn't matter. It's purely incidental. He says it doesn't matter that the French Revolution took place in France. It could have taken place anywhere. If it hadn't have taken place in France, then what it signified, something else with the same meaning, the same connotation, would have taken its place, whether it was centered on a personality like Napoleon, or in the case of the classical civilization of Alexander, who signifies the same thing. Doesn't matter whether it was a personality or whether whether the same event manifests itself as an anonymous mass of individuals, as in the case of the Hyksos invasion in Egypt. All three of those events are morphologically homologous with each other, the Hyksos invasion, Napoleon, Alexander, because they all signify the shift that needs to happen in the culture at this point from the culture phase to the civilization phase. That's what these episodes signify. And so he says it wouldn't have made any difference whether it was the French or the British or whoever. It's that the event takes place that matters. And so he also has a kind of theory that that undermines, I think, the great man theory of history. He says that, for example, if Goethe had been killed as a young man, then that which he signified would have been fulfilled by someone else. Someone else in the culture would have taken over and fulfilled that. So we can say that if Darwin perhaps had not lived or had died young, then the theory of evolution might be called the Wallacean theory of evolution, since Alfred Russel Wallace came up with exactly the same theory at the same time and completely unknown to each other. Just like with the infinitesimal calculus, with Leibniz and Newton coming up with it at the same time. These ideas come up in separate minds simultaneously because they have to do with the inward fulfillment of the destiny of the culture that needs those structures at that particular point in its unfolding. And so incident may seem to be something random, it may seem to be chance, and the world may seem to be governed by chance, and to a great degree Spengler is admitting that it is, but ultimately underneath all of this apparent circumstance and incident, there is a historical destiny in the particular civilization working itself out that predetermines what's going to happen. And so in an interesting way here, this undermines the great man theory of history, since individuals don't matter, and he even says that that which an individual signifies, as in the case of Napoleon or Alexander, could just as well be fulfilled by an anonymous happening like the Hyksos invasion. So it doesn't really matter whether it's fulfilled by an individual or not. But he's coming out of this kind of ancient Bronze Age determinism, which in the Bronze Age and in the civilizations of Mesopotamia had been tied to astrology. Spengler's model here isn't, but nonetheless it has the same kind of sensibility of predetermination about it that undermines the deeds of great men, that undermines the wrestle with fate as it is already a sort of predetermined outcome. There is no destiny in the sense that, though, that a civilization in being, though internally it fulfills these structures, that civilization can still be wiped out, as the Mayan civilization was wiped out by the Spaniards, for instance. It can still be cut off. You can still have an abortive civilization. There is no destiny that predetermines that this civilization will live to a definitive life course. That part is not predetermined. A civilization, once it enters, according to Spengler, on the civilization phase, once it moves from culture to civilization, can't exist in a state of indefinite petrifaction. So it can be cut off at any point in its life cycle. There is no predetermination regarding how long it's going to be there on the earth. Because it's like a living organism. As long as it's there, it will fulfill its predetermined agonies, as it were, its predetermined sufferings, its predetermined stages of what is going to happen. So he comes out of and represents this ancient Bronze Age cosmic determinism that is the very opposite to Toynbee's model of history, which is indeed based on the causal principle, in which everything has an explanation. Toynbee explains everything, and he's very much a rationalist and a bit of a materialist, I think, as well. He did have respect for religion. I shouldn't be so hard on him. He did have respect for religion, and he saw religion as one of the motivating factors. But Toynbee nonetheless exhibits this kind of this dragon slayer myth of the great deeds of the civilization. Nothing is predetermined for civilization, according to Toynbee. Everything is a matter of choice. It can go one way or the other. Nothing predetermines it whatsoever. This is the Indo-Aryan dragon slayer myth that came in to displace these earlier models of cosmic-based determinism that we find rejected in all the world's dragon slayer myths. The dragon, more often than not, personifies either the mother goddess with whom these ancient cults tend to be associated, these astronomical, astrological cults, as in the case of the Sibylle cults, or personifies the fatalism of the cosmos in an abstract way, as in the case of the Babylonian myth, where Marduk slays Tiamat, and Tiamat has 12 monsters. Those are the 12 signs of the zodiac, and she has a priest who has the tables of the maze on him, which are the Babylonian destiny idea, the May, the cosmic order. The Egyptian destiny idea, by the way, is Mot. Spengler doesn't talk about it in here, but it's Mot. It's the truth that establishes a pantheon of archetypes that are unchanging and that cannot be departed from. And if the individual, such as Akhenaten, departs from them, he will meet with punishment in the afterlife. That's the basic destiny idea of Egypt, by the way, Mot. And so that is the basic essence of Spengler's discussion between the destiny idea and the causality principle. Destiny has to do with life and direction, as he puts it here in a diagram. Causality has to do with extension. Destiny is the uniquely occurring and irrevocable fact, whereas causality has to do with the constantly possible truth, as in a scientific experiment where the point of the experiment is its repeatability. It has to be capable of repetition so that others can arrive at the same results, and they can therefore be said to be objective. But in the world as it unfolds according to destiny and history, things are singularities. They are facts, not truths. They are singular events that happen once and are never repeated again, and not to be repeatable. So he has a vision of destiny as a series of singularities, not this old cyclical idea of destiny that I was just talking about. It's not the cyclical idea that he shares in common with the astrological determinism. It's the determinism itself that he shares in common with that historical tradition. So we have physiognomic tact versus systematic criticism, and we have the consciousness as a servant of being versus consciousness as a master of being. The world image of history versus the world image of nature. And so in the world image of nature, both the man of truth, the systematist, and the man who is inclined toward vision, this is vision versus reason, but it's the vision of the middle eye, the inner eye, the eye to which religious visions come out of the imagination and unfold possibilities. They are in contention and struggle with one another for mastery over the world picture. And in the course of his civilization, this back and forth dialectic will go on. Newton in opposition to Goethe, Dante in opposition to a figure like Kant, perhaps, a world stripped of time and of causes and turned into an official collection of truths versus a world in which visions are governing the unfolding of events that have inward significance as they unfold. How and when something happens is what the systematist does not answer. He answers only the how, perhaps, but not the significance of the when something happens. He's interested in answering how something happens and why it happens, but not when, not the significance of when. And so this is Spengler, once again, this is Spengler's attempt to sort of draw boundaries against the civilization man, which he generally despises, the phase of culture that he calls civilization, with the that tends to produce a type of late megalopolitan fact man, the Carl Sagan, let's say, or the Isaac Asimov, or the Stephen Hawking. This kind of man for whom the world as nature is simply a secretless, sterile picture of facts and eternal laws that have been sterilized of mystery, ambiguity, and any kind of spiritual or metaphysical dimension whatsoever. That's wiped out by the fact man. Even the truth man is a type of rationalistic fact man that tends to surface during the megalopolitan civilization phase of a culture, and the type I think that Spengler despises here. He definitely sides with the man of culture, for whom metaphysics and mathematics are intimately interwed, and even the great philosophers like Leibniz and Newton and so forth, whether they're of the systematic type or whether they're of the physiognomic type, nonetheless, as he says of these philosophers, they also have a mathematic. The great metaphysicians like Leibniz and Newton and Descartes and Pascal are also simultaneously grand mathematicians. And the fact men, the philosophers of the later culture, of the civilization phase, as they file on stage, tend not to be they lose this mathematical ability. Schopenhauer is really the first one in Western philosophy to begin to lose this interest in mathematics. Nietzsche didn't have it, and generally Heidegger wasn't concerned with mathematics much. And so that's the vision of the opposition between the destiny idea and the causality principle in this chapter.